Thank you, everybody. What a fantastic turnout. We've got a packed room, we've got a standing room only at the back, for why Ford won and how to fight him.
Can we just point out there's one empty seat here if someone wants it?
Yes, and there's a couple of empty seats at the front, so if anybody wants to come down the front, that's cool. So it's, Ford won. And some people consider that a tragedy. And, when you're thinking about tragedies, my mind's always taken to Shakespeare. That, friends, Romans, countrymen, comrades, I come here not to praise Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals, but to bury them. That if we're going to understand why Ford won, we have to understand the recent period we've lived through and the Liberal government since 2003. That here we've had a government of the middle, the centre. I hate that term, and what has it solved for working class people? Very, very little. It's seen a rise in inequality. It's seen a total polarisation in society, where the majority of us are struggling to survive. Many of us are being pushed down. We're having hydro rates go through the roof, tuition fees go through the roof, people trying to go from precarious job to precarious job to precarious job. Especially young people have a terrible standard of living, but working class people cannot, the old unionised manufacturing jobs, they're being contracted out, offshored. So everything that made life halfway comfortable is being eroded. And on the other side, a concentration of wealth, a massive concentration of wealth with the 1%, the ruling class, the establishment, the elite, if you want to, the downtown Toronto elites. Although not the same downtown Toronto elites that Doug Ford is talking about. I think he said that someone was an elite if they think they're smarter than you. Well, if it's people who are smarter than Doug Ford are elite, I think that's a very large sector of the population. This is the backdrop of 15 years of liberalism, and that's what explains this collapse of the middle, collapse of liberalism, collapse of the status quo. And this is an international phenomenon. It's an international phenomenon. From Trump and Sanders, Corbyn and Brexit, Mélenchon, Le Pen in France. Yep. So from country to country to country, there's been this polarisation. And Canada appeared to be, behind in that global development with, Trudeau and Wynne and other liberal centrists who have been seem to be relatively popular. But now this global wave of polarisation is starting to come to Canada with the victory of our mini-me Donald Trump in the figure of Doug Ford. I'm going to come to sort of Ford, what Ford actually represents in a little bit. But we should remind ourselves what the Liberal government actually did. So they presided over this incredible polarisation. And they had this great little trick. And it's not a very new trick. They've been doing it since the beginning of Canada. That it's called campaigning left and governing right. That every election, they present their progressive face. They present their left face. And they were faced with also an opposition from the NDP, Canada's historical Labour Party based upon the trade unions, who had been sort of won over to this Blairite dogma that elections are won in the centre, or elections are won in the middle, elections are won by moderating. And so the NDP would do their very best to look like Liberals. And the Liberals would do their very best to look like the NDP. And strangely enough, the Liberals kept winning. And the people at the top of the NDP would never learn from that actually being on the left wins you elections. And they'd keep on going to the right. For example, in the 2014 provincial election, the NDP actually ran on a platform of $600 million of cuts. Utterly crazy. And the Liberals campaigned to the left of them and won. At the same time as demonising the Conservatives under Hudak for our 100,000 job losses, 100,000 cut public sector jobs. And they managed to sort of get people to vote Liberal on the basis of strategic voting. Right? You've got to vote for us. You've got to vote for us. Otherwise, the big bad Tories are going to win. And you've got to vote for lesser evil politics. Right? This is the same thing that you see in the United States with the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats, there's, the difference between the Republicans and Democrats is so very small, and on economic policy it makes no difference, absolutely no difference. But they always, they run on this mantra of you've got to support us for the lesser evil. Well, the lesser evil politics in the United States has brought Donald Trump, and the lesser evil politics in Ontario has brought Doug Ford. But what did the Liberals do? Well, there's the gas plant scandal. They wasted hundreds of millions of dollars on shutting down gas plants, and then the final kicker, the last straw was the privatisation of hydropower, and how the hydro rates went through the roof. They're going. Actually, the hydro rates in Toronto were twice that in the rest of the country. So people were perfectly justified to be angry at this government, especially when they're being laid off from their unionised job, they're facing cutbacks, everything. They can't afford it, and then their hydro rates go through the roof, and other elements of making life just less and less affordable. So people are angry at the status quo. Now the Liberals also, they tried to do their old trick of sort of turning left and to gain support, and they did it by wholeheartedly sort of stealing the NDP's platform. So they put in the $14 minimum wage, with the prospect of $15 if you re-elect them. They proposed a childcare program, made childcare free for between the ages of 2.5 and 4, partial farmer care, lots of reforms, and sadly, some people were sucked in by this trick, because it's the same old trick that they've been doing forever, and you could guarantee if it worked, and they actually had won this election, they'd be taking it all back tomorrow. They'd be taking it all back, because they're fundamentally a party based upon Bay Street, just a few blocks from here. They're a party of the big bankers and the big bosses, and we must not fall for this trick. Thankfully, people didn't this time around, but fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. So, what happened in the election? Well, I think the breaking point was the first debate, the first televised debate, where it was mostly Ford and Wynne going up against each other, and Horvath, quite well said, "Look, these two are fighting. You don't have to choose between bad and worse. You can choose a different option." Right? And from that point on, the NDP support started going up and up and up. And they went from the mid-20s to sort of almost 40% on the basis of that. People said, look, people had decided, look, we're sick of the status quo. We're sick of liberalism. We want fundamental change. But people hadn't decided what kind of change they wanted, whether it was going to be Ford or whether it was going to be the NDP. And thankfully, the NDP had also learnt from its previous mistakes, from many years of more right-wing platforms. They actually put forward some reforms that would improve people's lives. So they put forward $12 childcare and free childcare, I think, if your income was under $30,000. They put forward a pharmacare plan, but it was partial because it only covered like 125 drugs instead of all of the 4,000 drugs. They put forward renationalisation of Hydro One. It was a very good demand, but they picked a very technocratic and prolonged way of doing it to buy back those shares at market rates rather than just taking it over, expropriating it, saying these bosses had had their fill with inflated prices in the previous period. But the NDP's election platform, while partial, not universal, so we criticised it that look, you shouldn't. It shouldn't just be sort of partial reforms. It should be universal reforms. It should be, like healthcare, free at the point of use. But unlike their previous platforms, it was a step to the left and enough to enthuse people to vote for NDP and sideline the Liberals. That was very, very good. And this proceeded into the second leadership debate, which I think was the high point of the NDP's campaign. High point of, I think Horvath did very well at that debate. And you could really see the true face of both the Conservatives and the Liberals in that debate. From that they were both trying to, you had the right-wing media, the Toronto Sun, trying to muckrake as much as possible, trawling through every NDP candidate's social media account. I encourage everybody to look at your own social media account and just imagine what Sun News would take out of there and to fearmonger what you've got in there. And they actually didn't find much considering sort of what people do post on social media these days. And tried to sort of muckrake ridiculously. But what was really noticeable was the true face of the Liberals came out. That instead of this sort of progressives, left-wing, reformist, pro-union party, what do? Attacked the NDP over the democratic right to strike. Attacked the unions. Attacked working class people. Utterly disgusting. Attacked York University workers who are on strike right now. They showed their true face. They showed, and it wasn't just a one-off in the debates. It was a consistent attack that they backed up in terms of newspaper and radio and television adverts and online advertising. So a sort of a disgusting anti-worker attack. And to her credit, Andrew Horwath stood up to this and said, look, it's a constitutional right that people can bargain collectively. Freedom of expression, freedom of organisation, and we stand for that. And so full credit to sort of Andrew Horwath and the NDP for not buckling to that right-wing pressure. So why didn't they win? I think we can all agree it would be a much better world if the NDP, a much better Ontario if the NDP had won the election. Well, there was a few factors around that. One of which was the role of a sector of the trade union leadership that had utterly, criminally been sucked in to this mantra of strategic voting. A number of the major unions, Unifor, I think OPSU, some of the teachers' unions, a number of others, including the head of the Canadian Labour Congress as well, who was completely silent throughout the Ontario election, had been won to this policy of strategic voting. So much so, I think they were campaigning for the NDP in 50-something seats, and for the Liberals in about more than 70 seats. Utterly criminal, and utterly counterproductive. This idea of voting for the lesser evil. Well, you just show the swing in public opinion these days. Strategic voting, it's an excuse to vote Liberal. It's an excuse to vote for the party of Bay Street. And this strategic voting campaign continued after Wynne started attacking the unions directly over the right to strike. And so the organised labour, representing I think 1.6 million workers in Ontario, were not fully mobilised behind the NDP. I have many criticisms of the party leadership, but in this election it was so clear a class vote that the only way to defeat the Conservatives was an NDP vote, and the unions did not do their duty. Also, some people on the left did not do their duty. There's a Fight for 15 campaign, which is working together with the Ontario Federation of Labour. Actually has a rally on Saturday, which I encourage everybody to attend. We'll be there in force. But actually here they proposed a Liberal vote. Liberal yes, and vote for those parties are supporting $15, and it goes Liberal yes, NDP yes, Green yes. Even when the Liberals were attacking working class people and the right to strike. So there was a lot of confusion on the left. That your first duty is to say, well, no to the Conservatives, absolutely no to the Liberals. And I can understand people who may be reticent to say vote NDP because of some of their bad campaigns. But at least in this election, there's absolutely no excuse at all. That's it. That there needed to be a good NDP vote to defeat Ford, but that didn't happen. And the other reason why the Doug Ford won, well, I think you have to put some responsibility on the leadership of the NDP. That while they stood up to some of these right-wing attacks, and they did put forward partial reforms, they didn't understand the nature of what the animal that Doug Ford is and the polarisation in society. People wanted fundamental change. People were rejecting the status quo. And you cannot defeat an anti-establishment message from the right with a pro-establishment message. Cannot be done. Right? The only thing that can defeat an anti-establishment message of the right is an anti-establishment message of the left. We don't blame poor people. We don't blame immigrants. No, we blame the bosses that actually run the economy. Right? Who's pushing down your wages? Who's laying you off? Who's raising your tuition and other costs of living? It's not some poor soul who's trying to escape a civil war. No, it's those who actually have money and power in the society. And that credible argument can win people over. Because people didn't vote Ford because they're racist, sexist, homophobic. No, they voted Ford because they wanted change. And they could have been won to a sort of a radical socialist message from the left, an anti-establishment message of the left, if it had been put forward. So while the NDP's platform was definitely sufficient to stop people from supporting the Liberals yet again, it didn't really speak to these people who wanted fundamental change. And if you look at other movements on the left in other countries, like Bernie Sanders, what did he call for? A revolution against the billionaire class. Right? And he created a mass movement around that. This is very similar language to Doug Ford from the left. Understanding that there is an establishment, there is an elite, that there is a billionaire class that runs things in society. You didn't really get any of that language from the NDP. They didn't really try to build a mass movement. like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders both ran on the campaign of free education, mobilised millions of young people behind them. I think 300,000 people joined the British Labour Party to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. And the NDP, their stuff on higher education was very limited. They didn't say anything about tuition fees. They proposed some student grants, but all of that could have been just eaten up by tuition hikes. Right? So they didn't mobilise people against the establishment. And when it really comes down to it, it is actually an analysis, it's a Marxist analysis of what is the capitalist state. Right? The NDP we criticised the NDP platform being partial reforms, so it should have been universal programmes. But even if they put forward the best programme possible, unless you actually build a mass movement, then there's absolutely no guarantee that that programme is going to be put into place. No guarantee at all. Because we live in a class society, and the capitalists run the state, and they run the media, and they run the economy. So unless you're actually prepared to counter-organise against them, that programme will not be implementable. Right? And this is the lesson of the Bob Rae government from 1990 to 1995. Rae won, and actually I'm going to defend Bob Rae as a man. It could seem like a very unusual thing for me to do. People were using the spectre of Bob Rae in this election to say, don't vote NDP because Bob Rae was a disaster. And Horvath was saying, well, Rae's a liberal now. But the reality is that the Rae NDP government failed not because Rae's a liberal, he is and was, but it failed because of the logic of reformism. That the 1990 NDP government was elected on a programme of modest reforms, quite similar to the present NDP platform. But when it got elected, it faced a massive onslaught from the right, a red-baiting onslaught. They likened Bob Rae to sort of Lenin and Che Guevara, which is quite laughable if you think about, he led the Liberal Party. They organised a capital strike, so they refused to invest. They put adverts in the New York Times and the Washington Post saying, do not invest in socialist Ontario. So they combined with an economic crisis, and the most rabid attacks from the Toronto Sun, the right-wing media. So that they mobilised all the extra parliamentary forces possible. The capitalists understand that politics isn't just elections, it's not just voting. There are plenty of extra parliamentary forces they can muster, and we should do extra parliamentary activity also. And on that basis, the Rae NDP government wasn't prepared to break with capitalism in an economic crisis. In an economic crisis, you can't put forward reforms and improvements for the working class if you base yourself on capitalism. Capitalism has a logic. If there's no money, well, somebody has to pay. And it's either the workers pay or the bosses pay. And that was the contradiction that the Rae government faced. Do you take the money from the workers, or you take the money from the bosses and head towards socialism? Well, of course, he was not prepared to head towards socialism, so he ditched his programme, ditched public auto insurance and many other reforms, and began attacking the working class, Rae days, unpaid days off, etc., etc. And the Horvath NDP didn't give any inkling that it would be able to stand up to the billionaire class, to the establishment, to the elite. So people asking themselves, how am I going to oppose the status quo? Well, Ford's language, for the people, against the elite, was much more emotive. Okay. Now, of course, it's a con. We know it's a con, that's why we're here. It's a total, it's manipulative and totally dishonest. Like, he couldn't even say what he's going to cut. Right? $6 billion of efficiencies, which you shall wash down with your $1 beer. Right? It's utterly... and a little bit of homophobia in terms of the sex ed, his sort of wink and a nod to the religious rights. Right? So, but $6 billion of efficiencies, and not a single person will be laid off. Let's see him try to keep that promise for $6 billion of efficiencies. So this is, but it worked. It worked. They managed to win the election on that completely dishonest basis, and they have no mandate. They have no mandate at all. We know that they're coming for us. We know that they're coming for workers, organised workers, unorganised workers. They're going to ditch the minimum wage increase to 15. Oh, but we get, an $18 tax cut. Right? But you get $1,200 if you're in the top bracket. So it's all right if you're there.
What do you mean by they have no mandate? You mean they have no platform? Or
They have
no authority to act?
They have not ran on a campaign, by no mandate, they have not ran on a campaign of what they're going to cut. Right? Actually, they've said they are not going to cut. It's going to be an efficiency. Right? So a politician only has a mandate to do what they've actually told people they're going to do. Right? And what they've told people is not a single person will lose their job. Right? And this is not a popular government. It is not a popular government. In fact, Ford is not personally popular. He squandered a 20% lead in the polls. At the beginning of the election, he had a 20% lead in the polls, and that got frittered down to 6%. And he's personally not popular. In terms of the vote, the sort of 40% vote, they didn't get 40%. They got 40% of the vote on a 58% turnout. So fewer than 1 in 4 people of eligible voters voted for Ford. And his personal popularity, normally, if you think about when Justin Trudeau was elected, you'd think he could walk on water, he could do no wrong. The personal popularity of Ford is 25% have a positive view of Ford. This means actually 15% of Conservative voters don't like Ford. And 54% oppose Ford. So there is an overwhelming majority of people who already hate this government. So that is a large base to organise and mobilise. So they don't, but they're preparing big attacks. Like the first attack is likely going to be to legislate the strikers up at York University back to work. And this is a fantastic opportunity for the entire movement to rally behind these workers. If they defy, and the labour movement is behind them, this could put the Ford government on its back, on a back foot, right from the start. Stop them from attacking people, right from the start. I don't know if that's happening. The union leadership seems a bit divided at the moment, but it could. With good leadership, it could happen. It could happen. The other thing, it's like they're going to put forward. They're going to remove the less, the slightly more progressive sex ed in schools. So that's an important fight to be waged against sort of rolling back. The irony is that Doug Ford will be rolling back sex ed to the one that was implemented under Bob Rae. This is Bob Rae's sex ed. So tell him that. And the other thing, and this is an existential threat to organised workers. They said they will privatise. He said he will privatise and contract out everything. He said that everything will go up to tender, from pencils to newspapers. Absolutely everything. So if you are a public sector worker, he's basically said that your job is going to be contracted out. And it's vital, and that's not just an attack on, the so-called labour aristocracy, that unionised workers. No, the union workers create an example for the unorganised workers. They raise the level of expectations. And this is why the capitalists were so opposed to raising the minimum wage, because that raises expectations. But if they break the unions, that lowers expectations for sort of workers, union and non-union. So it's vital that these are sort of three first attacks. I'm sure there will be many, many more attacks that we'll find out about when the details of his efficiencies come about.
Well, if you move away from fiscal, he's already knocked down the door to let people vote.
I'm just going to ask people to wait until the discussion period.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. So yeah, there's going to be attack after attack after attack, and if the unions don't sort of wake up from their sort of a strategic voting-induced hangover and actually fight, then they've got an existential threat of being contracted out and privatised. So there needs to be a whole-scale fight back. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, we need to organise today. We need to, and that's why it's so fantastic that we've got a packed room here. People want to fight. People don't want to just let these attacks happen. And we saw what happened under Mike Harris, the attacks after attacks after attacks, and people learned from that lesson. And look, you've got to fight, and you have to fight today. You have to fight, and the left, socialist groups like Fightback, are going to do their duty and fight today. In fact, we've got a plan to begin organising today. We've got tabling and postering. And I'm hoping that people will want to get involved in that, and demonstrations. Come to the demonstration on Saturday, and other demonstrations. So we've got to organise today. We've got to get the word out and build that movement. But at the same time, we have to understand that small socialist organisations or medium-sized socialist organisations cannot turn the mass of public opinion in the country. We can't. We can reach, hundreds, maybe thousands of people, but there's millions of people who live here. The job of organising a mass fight back that can actually defeat this government lies with the unions and lies with the NDP leadership. And we must demand that they fight. We must demand that they fight. So what happened under Mike Harris? That there was a mass movement on the streets, put pressure upon union leaderships. There was numerous resolutions calling for general strike at the Ontario Federation of Labour, and there was the Metro Days of Action. There's a lot of young faces in the room, so maybe you don't remember that, or you were in primary school when it happened, or sometime. But there was a movement of citywide general strikes. And it really put the Harris government on the back foot in the first days. And they were quite unpopular in the first days, while there was a sort of a mass fight back. But the scope of this movement really made the leadership of the trade unions afraid. And so after the biggest sort of walkout, they shut down Hamilton for a day. Andrew Horvath actually played a role in organising that shutdown. But then it didn't go on. They stopped. They just stopped organising them due to bureaucratic expediency, because they were afraid of the movement going for a province-wide general strike and the radicalisation that would mean. So we need to demand a mass fight back from the leaders of the Labour movement and the leaders of the New Democratic Party that can actually mobilise the majority of people. So combining sort of organising on the ground and demanding action for our leaders, not letting them off the hook. We can't let them off the hook. And it's not, I wouldn't say that's an easy prospect, because they've been so very bankrupt and the leadership has been fighting amongst themselves. You had Unifor split away to do raiding. But what we need to do is organise from the base and kick out those leaders that won't fight and put in leaders that do fight, while showing it can be done on the ground, showing a good socialist example. And at the end of the day, we also need to fight for the movement to adopt socialist politics. Socialist politics, because you cannot defeat the anti-establishment right with the politics of the status quo. Liberalism or weak reformism cannot be done. Cannot be done. You've got to give people an answer of why things are wrong, why society does not work. And the only answer to that is because the capitalists cannot run capitalism. But we shouldn't be trying to run capitalism better than the capitalists. No, we need a new society, and that society is called socialism. We need to, yes, overthrow the billionaire class, have a revolution against the billionaire class, and that's what will really scare the capitalists. Ironically, actually, that is what will get them to back off and give reforms, right? Because if you accept the logic of the capitalist system, they're just going to laugh at you. But if you say, look, we don't accept your right to rule, we don't accept what you're doing to people, if you cannot provide for working class people, then your society, your system deserves to be overthrown, and we'll build a better one built by and for working class people. Or then maybe they'll throw us some reforms to get us to go home. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see. So we don't accept their right to rule because they have demonstrably been incapable of ruling. And that is popular. That can win people over. In Britain, a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party, standing on the basis of renationalisation of public services, is massively popular. Is massively popular. It can be done. It can totally be done. So what I'm asking people here is to join us. To join our fight. Make sure that every attack by Ford and his cronies and Big Business Canada is faced with a radical opposition. We'll be going straight to the people on the streets, tabling, postering, demonstrations, while at the same time demanding that leaders of the unions, leaders of the workers' organisations actually fight. And we're heading into a period of intense struggle. If anybody wanted an easy life, I'm sorry, you picked a very bad time to be born. And you've got no choice but to fight. You've got no choice to fight. They're going to be attacking. They're already attacking. They're already attacking, and it's only going to get worse. And if you don't fight back, weakness invites aggression. The less the fight back is, the bigger the corporate offensive will be. So I encourage people, join the fight, educate yourself about socialist ideas, that this government is unpopular and can be defeated. A movement can be built, but it has to be organised. Thank you.